To return now to local issues and politics. Joining us is the National Affairs Editor at The Australian, Simon Benson. Simon, thanks so much. It was interesting when Scott Morrison became Treasurer, he said, I'm going to be focused on domestic issues. I think from memory, he even sent Matthias Cormann in his place to a G20 finance ministers meeting. But it's funny, when you're leader and you're Prime Minister, you can't really do that. And now his attention more and more being dictated by foreign and strategic policy, isn't it?
Absolutely. But I think as Treasurer, he soon found out that when you've got an integrated economy, a global economy, you can't remain domestic for too long. I mean, it's, our economy relies on international movements and affairs. So, but as leader, everything is international at the moment. Our economy, the fears about economic growth are all international. And everything's pivoting to this region. And I think you've seen very strong statements over the weekend from the US about what they expect our role to be.
It does seem like Australia did anticipate, and Scott Morrison as well, with our Pacific push that he was announcing last year, this pivot towards the Pacific, but it seems like we're still not getting definitive answers on who is our strategic ally that's the most important, whether it's the US for that defence capability or whether it's China for the economic benefit that it brings to Australia.
Look, I think if you go back and look at Scott Morrison's first foreign affairs speech, which was a few weeks ago in Sydney, there were some subtleties in there and there were some things that weren't so subtle. And the language was directed at, I guess, the outcome of this AUSMIN talks at the weekend. I mean, Secretary of State, US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo was very strong. I don't think you've heard a Secretary of State speak so aggressively about the situation in our region. But Scott Morrison this isn't a surprise. I think he's been working towards this outcome. I think it makes for some uncomfortable relationships in terms of our economic partnership with China, which Scott is trying to manage as well. This makes it a little bit more complex.
His relationship with Donald Trump, it's an interesting one. They're different generations, really, but I think Donald Trump likes what he sees in Morrison, sees himself as the underdog that won like him, and they seem to have a decent rapport. I guess as we look to next month, September, and the White House visit, this issue of the Iranian problem and the Strait of Hormuz, most likely, as we discussed with James Brown before the break, it's probably going to be resolved and announced as a big commitment side by side at the White House. Is that your sense of things?
Possibly. I think it might even come sooner than that. Between now and then you have the G7, and for the first time an Australian Prime Minister has been invited to be an observer leader at the G7, invited by the French to come, and which is interesting as well because the French are expressing a great interest at the moment in pivoting back to the Pacific as well. So I think the G7 is a very, very important meeting. Those issues will be front and centre at that meeting as well. So you might even see a statement or a decision before then.
What can Scott Morrison really do on the G7 stage to make Australia's presence felt? It's some big, powerful nations appearing there, and it will be interesting to see what his role is.
Oh, well, I don't think he'll play any role. I mean, what will be interesting, it'll be the first sort of official meeting between Boris Johnson and Donald Trump, and that'll be the first sort of big meeting where those two will be present. So some big personalities. There'll be some big statements. I think again, as you recall at the G20, the dinner that Donald Trump had with Scott Morrison was a very big statement as well regionally. It showed, it was projecting to our region that Australia was the US's key ally in our region. Now, to be invited to the G7 as well projects further that relationship.
It's interesting because, as you point out, sometimes it's not the summit itself, it's not the set of talks or the communicate, what happens on the sideline of those talks that matters. Well, as you referred to, the most recent one.
Yeah, well, and Donald Trump, as we know, is a very unconventional leader, so he's not inclined to necessarily follow protocol at those sort of summits, so he'll do what he wants to do. He wanted to have that meeting, and I think there was two elements to it. He was genuinely interested in Scott Morrison. He was genuinely interested in what happened in the election, but also he is being driven in large part by people like Pompeo to really focus attention on our region, and I think Donald Trump now gets it. And Scott Morrison said,
I think hockey, just quickly, hockey's done a fantastic job in this Trump era, in my opinion, as ambassador. And the challenge will be this transition. I mean, I have no doubt Arthur Sinodinos is up to it, but he's got to be nimble, doesn't he, in terms of how you deal with this administration?
Absolutely. Although I think that I agree with you entirely. Joe Hockey's done an amazing job for Australia as a representative in Washington. I don't think the relationship that we have at the moment with Donald Trump would be as it is. I think Joe Hockey at least saved us $300 or $400 million on steel tariffs. Yeah. He's instrumental in that. But I think that's well established now. I think Arthur's obviously a safe pair of hands in Washington.
Yep, indeed. Simon, great to see you. Appreciate it.